Hi, I'm Melanie. Thank you for joining me for this week at Little Hills, Psalms for our temple. And today we're going to look at Psalm 129, 130, and 131. To start off with Psalm 129, the verse that really stuck out to me was verse 2, and it reads, "Greatly have they afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me." And this psalm is all about Israel's suffering. Now, Israel is somewhat unique. The people group is one of the oldest people groups still in existence. They've pretty much ever since their start as a nation, they've been afflicted from other groups. But starting even when they came out of Egypt. But God has not forsaken them, and his purposes could not be thwarted. Now in Psalm 129, there's no despair in this psalm. It's just a determination to survive all the dangers that surround them. And I thought this psalm was really encouraging because, well, as we'll talk about later, as we face afflictions, we can find comfort in this. Now, some of the people groups that have afflicted the Israelites from way back, we've had the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Philistines, all the way up to modern times. We've had, the Nazis, all the way up, the kings of Europe. The Israelites have never had it easy. And in Psalm 129, this is a psalm about the determination to survive in spite of that. A quote from Horn that I thought was applicable to us. It says, "While the church subsisteth from generation to generation, the kingdoms and empires that have persecuted her fade and wither away of themselves." And we can take comfort in the fact that through all that, they still survived, and so does the church. And this psalm was originally about Israel, and we can't lose sight of that, but we can find things to comfort us in our lives here as well. Because we are the successors. We're carrying on God's work through the midst of persecution, oftentimes, just like they were. And this reminded me in this psalm of 2 Corinthians 4, 8 through 10. "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may be manifested in our bodies." So like the Israelites here, we can take comfort that God's purpose will be accomplished in spite of us, in spite of persecutions, and that he is always for us. Now, moving on to Psalm 130. This is one of the penitential psalms. We find 7 of those that are generally categorized as that in the book of Psalms. This psalm is one that's been meaningful to many over the centuries. We find Martin Luther and John Wesley among countless people who have been inspired by this psalm. It starts off with, "Out of the depths I have cried to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice." And I think that resonates with all of us. This psalm is written from the perspective of one who's overwhelmed with the weight of guilt and sin. And this is a deeper feeling than the kind that just runs surface level of just feeling bad. This is a depth of feeling that we're unable to help ourselves. And Charles Spurgeon writes of this psalm, he says, "In this psalm we hear of the pearl of redemption," verses 7 and 8. "Perhaps the sweet singer would never have found that precious thing had he not been cast into the depths. Pearls lie deep." And this is something that sometimes in our lives, unless we go through the really hard times that just tear us apart, sometimes we don't find just the treasure and the riches that God has for us until we go through those things. In verse 3, this psalmist says, "If God would mark iniquities, who would stand?" And this made me think of the verse that says, "All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." This psalm is very much about the guilt and just the pain of knowing how far we fall short and just our inability to help ourselves and dig ourselves out of that. Verses 7 and 8, O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him there is plentiful redemption, and he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities. So we find that there is redemption, and it's through the Lord. And in verse 4, moving on from that, it says, there is forgiveness with you, that you may be feared. Now, stop and think about that phrase for a moment. There is forgiveness. That is such a beautiful phrase. It just gives such hope, because no matter what we've done, no matter how far we've fallen, there is always forgiveness. Just stop and think that there is forgiveness. And we mess up every day, every minute, but there is still forgiveness. We're not lost. And then the last part of that verse there, that you may be feared, that makes me think of sanctification. That's the natural outgrowth of being forgiven. With this big, immense, beautiful forgiveness is a natural fear of the Lord, because just the immensity of his love and his forgiveness for us, it brings us to just a longing for purity and for growth and just a reverence for God. And it's been written that forgiveness and love is the fire that melts the ice of a sinful heart. So sanctification should be a natural byproduct, as we read about in the book of James later on. And the ending of this psalm is about waiting on the Lord and hoping in his word. We don't just passively sit by, we actively hope in his word. And Psalm 131, this is a very, very short psalm. It is only 3 verses long, so I'm just going to go ahead and read the entire thing. Psalm 131, O Lord, my heart is not lifted up, my eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me, but I have calmed and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. And the feeling that this psalm really brings out to me is a feeling of contentment in dependence. Not independence, but in the state of dependence. David here was the psalmist in this instance, and he is finding peace in knowing that there are a lot of things that are just too much for us, that we can just give our trust to God and wait and hope in him, and that he will calm us. It's a sense of security, that God is the one who's taking care of us. And in this psalm, he's pictured like our parent, like a mother holding a child, that the child trusts the mother. And it's the opposite of pride and arrogance. And that's something that all of us struggle with. I know I do. We feel like if we just learn enough, if we just can do enough, and we have ambition and we have a desire to better ourselves and to accomplish things. But this psalm makes us take a step back from that and realize when it all comes down to it, we just need to be like a child. And this made me think of Matthew 18, when Jesus was preaching, and he says, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." And this speaks of total focus on God and total dependence on him, and not in our own abilities and our own strength and our own intelligence. We just depend on God and keep our eyes fixed on him, and he will take care of us. And it's making ourselves and our ambitions take the back seat and depend on God. And thank you for joining me, and please join us again next week, and please also join us in person every week at 5:30 p.m. We meet on our Drosty Road location, and please join us for that. And also on Monday evenings, Pastor Tim is continuing his series in Steadfast, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Have a blessed week.